There is a briefing that senior American defense officials have been receiving with increasing frequency over the past 2 years. And the language inside it is not the kind of cautious, hedged language that government documents usually use. The assessment is direct. The United States currently leads the of 2025, warning that quantum computing, sensing, and communications will likely provide militaries with decisive quantum computing, one directing federal agencies to accelerate quantum innovation and commercialization, the other warning explicitly that large-scale quantum computers, 2 executive orders on the same day addressing a single emerging technology. That is not a routine policy update. That is an administration telling you it is alarmed. Stick with us, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what America's quantum lead actually consists of, what China has built while American attention was elsewhere, what defense analysts say could cause the United States to lose that lead, and technology journals for years without ever breaking into mainstream public awareness, and the stakes are genuinely historic. Let's start with where the United States actually stands, because understanding the threat requires an honest assessment of the starting position. America's quantum advantage is real, documented, and currently substantial in the most critical dimension, became the first quantum processor to demonstrate exponential error reduction as it scales, crossing the quantum error correction threshold that researchers had been chasing for 30 years. IBM has published a detailed roadmap toward fault-tolerant quantum researchers and enterprises globally. Atom computing has crossed 1,200 physical qubits using a neutral atom architecture with coherence, times measured in seconds rather than microseconds, and has already delivered a commercial on premises. Quantum Initiative, originally authorized with $1.2 billion and reauthorized with $1.8 billion, and enough to have reached the desks of defense officials at the highest levels. Don't scroll past without subscribing, because the China side of this ledger is where the alarm becomes impossible to dismiss. China's quantum investment strategy is unlike anything the United States has attempted in this domain, and understanding its structure is essential for understanding why American defense officials are concerned. In 2016, China launched a national megaproject specifically for quantum communications and computing, setting a goal of achieving significant breakthroughs by 2030 and committing public funding that the Heritage Foundation estimated at $15.3 billion in its 14th five-year plan alone, covering 2021 through 2025. That figure covers only publicly disclosed programs and explicitly excludes classified quantum research, the location and progress of which the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission stated in 2025 that China is deliberately obscuring. A broader Chinese state-backed technology fund targeting hard technologies, including quantum systems, was reported at approximately $140 billion across all covered emerging technologies, with quantum among the highest priority areas. The comparison to funding across its first decade is measured in the low single-digit billions. China's disclosed quantum investment alone runs into the tens of billions, with an unknown additional, covering 17 provinces and 80 cities continuously. China is planning to Security Review Commission's assessment was blunt on this point. China is positioned far ahead of any other country in scaling, or QKD, uses the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics to distribute encryption keys in a way that is theoretically impossible to intercept without being detected. A country with a functioning national-scale QKD network has built an encryption infrastructure for its most sensitive military, government, and financial communications that is not vulnerable to the harvest, now decrypt later threat that is alarming American defense. Planners about their own systems. China is simultaneously building the capability to eventually break adversaries' classical encryption using quantum computing and protecting its own most sensitive communications with quantum encryption that classical computers cannot break, and that would be difficult even for future. The Defense Intelligence Agency's May 2025 report on quantum, competition that receives far less public attention than quantum computing, but that military analysts consider equally or more immediately threatening to U.S. operational advantages. Quantum sensing uses the extraordinary sensitivity of quantum mechanical systems to measure physical quantities with precision that classical sensors cannot approach. Quantum atomic clocks deliver timing accuracy measured in picoseconds, enabling synchronized military operations across satellites, radars, and interceptors that are independent of GPS, which is itself vulnerable to jamming and spoofing. Quantum gravimeters and magnetometers can detect submarines by sensing subtle variations in the gravitational and magnetic signatures of submarines decades. Quantum radio frequency sensors can detect faint or stealthy missile signals even in heavily jammed environments, enabling passive and resilient monitoring against adversary stealth platforms. The implications for the U.S. military's current operational doctrine are severe. The nuclear ballistic missile submarines that form a critical leg of America's nuclear deterrent have historically been considered essentially undetectable. If quantum sensing can find them, a central pillar of American nuclear deterrence could be undermined in ways that no classical countermeasure can address, because the vulnerability stems from fundamental physics rather than from any specific technological choice that can be engineered around. An October 2025 article in the Center for Strategic and International Studies specifically named quantum sensing as a threat to nuclear delivery platforms long considered invulnerable, and the DIA report reinforced that quantum-enabled advances will improve targeting and long-range precision fires for any military that achieves operational quantum sensing capability before its adversaries. Don't miss the next section, because the infrastructure vulnerabilities that make America's quantum lead fragile are not the ones that most people expect. The Homeland Security Today analysis, published in March 2026, identified what it called an infrastructure crisis, threatening United States supremacy in the quantum race, and the crisis it described has nothing to do with the quality of American quantum research. American quantum researchers at Google, IBM, MIT, Caltech, and dozens of other institutions are producing world-class results. The problem is in physical infrastructure required to build, operate, and scale quantum systems at the pace required to stay ahead. Quantum computers require cooling to temperatures colder than outer space within fractions of a degree of absolute zero, using dilution refrigerators that require extremely specialized components and manufacturing processes. The raw materials for many of these components, including rare earth elements used in superconducting magnets and specialized electronics, involve supply chains with significant exposure to Chinese production and refining capacity. The United States has approximately 1.4 million tons of rare earth element reserves, one of the world's largest deposits, but currently mines and refines only a fraction of what the quantum and semiconductor industries together require, with the gap filled by imports from China. This supply chain vulnerability is not hypothetical. China demonstrated its willingness to use rare earth exports as a geopolitical lever during earlier technology disputes, and the concentration of rare earth refining capacity in China represents a structural risk to American quantum hardware manufacturing that has not been adequately addressed by current policy. The Office of Management and Budget estimated in 2025 that transitioning high-priority federal systems to post-quantum cryptography alone will cost $7.1 billion between 2025 and 2035. And that is entirely separate from the investment required to build and maintain the quantum computing hardware that would operate those systems. Without a concentrated and coherent investment strategy that addresses both the research excellence and the physical infrastructure sides of the equation, the United States risks finding itself in the position of having the world's best quantum researchers working in facilities that cannot scale fast enough to keep pace with an adversary deploying industrial-scale manufacturing capacity against a single national priority. Like and subscribe, because the executive branch response to these concerns arrived in the form of 2 executive orders signed on the same day, and what they actually require of federal agencies is worth understanding in detail. On June 22nd of 2026, President Trump signed Executive Order 14413, directing the federal government to accelerate quantum innovation, commercialization, deployment, manufacturing, and national security applications, and Executive Order 14412, which warned explicitly that large-scale quantum computers in adversarial hands will threaten widely used cryptographic systems and enable hostile actors to collect encrypted American data now and decrypt it later. The post-quantum cryptography companion effort attached to these orders requires federal agencies to prioritize migration of vulnerable cryptographic systems with a hard deadline of December 2029, consistent with Google's own publicly announced internal migration timeline. Policy analysts noted that these executive orders built directly on the National Security Memorandum 10 issued by the Biden administration in 2022, making this one of the rare technology policy areas where there has been genuine bipartisan continuity across administrations, suggesting that the intelligence briefings driving these decisions are compelling regardless of which party is in office. The Center for a New American Security published a commentary specifically urging the Trump administration to prioritize advancing and protecting America's quantum technology. Leadership, arguing that the pace of U.S.-China competition in quantum technology requires a more aggressive federal posture than the existing National Quantum Initiative framework was designed to provide. CNAS researchers noted that quantum leadership requires not only sustaining research investment, but also developing export controls, talent pipeline policies, and allied coordination frameworks that collectively protect the U.S. advantage from erosion through technology transfer, talent, recruitment, and industrial espionage. China has a well-documented history of using each of these vectors in its pursuit of semiconductor and artificial intelligence capabilities, and quantum technology is explicitly on the list of domains where the same playbook is being applied. Don't scroll past without subscribing, because the talent dimension of this competition is perhaps the most structurally difficult vulnerability to address. The quantum computing workforce pipeline is a frequently overlooked dimension of the US-China quantum competition that defense and intelligence analysts have identified as a potential long-term vulnerability independent of investment levels or hardware progress. Quantum computing research requires a uniquely rare combination of expertise in quantum mechanics, mathematics, computer science, and engineering, skills that take years of graduate education to develop, and that are currently produced by a relatively small number of universities worldwide. China's central government has been actively recruiting quantum talent through programs including the 1,000 Talents Plan and related initiatives that offer significant financial incentives and research facilities to attract Chinese origin researchers from American universities and laboratories back to China, as well as to recruit non-Chinese quantum researchers willing to work in Chinese institutions. American universities produce a significant number of quantum PhDs, who subsequently work at Chinese universities, companies, and research institutions, creating a talent flow that partially offsets the research advantage that American institutions maintain within the United States, the export control framework, that restricts transfer of quantum hardware, and certain quantum software has no direct equivalent for human capital, meaning that quantum expertise developed in American graduate programs, paid for by American federal research grants, can and does flow back to China through entirely legal channels. This is not unique to quantum technology, and it reflects a genuine tension between America's tradition of open scientific exchange and the national security implications of building adversary capacity in a domain explicitly identified as a critical national asset. The National Quantum Initiative reauthorization legislation that has been advancing through Congress includes provisions specifically aimed at strengthening the quantum workforce pipeline within the United States, including fellowship programs, career pathway initiatives, and incentives for quantum researchers to remain in domestic industry and government positions. Whether these programs can be scaled quickly enough to meaningfully reduce the talent outflow is a question that workforce analysts are watching closely over the next several years. The allied dimension of the quantum competition is also worth examining, because the United States does not face this challenge alone, and the decisions being made by allied governments about where to invest, whose technology to adopt, and how to coordinate quantum research programs will significantly affect whether the democratic world maintains its collective lead. The United Kingdom committed £2.5 billion over 10 years in its national quantum strategy, launched in 2023, and in March of 2026 announced an additional £2 billion in quantum computing procurement and scaling through the Pro-Core program. Canada committed 334 million Canadian dollars in quantum in its 2025 federal budget, with additional programs for quantum defense applications. Australia has invested over 2.3 billion Australian dollars cumulatively in quantum research and development. Japan designate D 2025 as the first year of quantum industrialization and committed substantial funding, with a goal of creating 10 million quantum users and a quantum-driven economy by 2030. The Riken Institute in Japan has already deployed a 256-qubit superconducting system built with Fujitsu and has partnered with IBM for hybrid quantum classical research. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance and NATO have all discussed quantum security coordination, and NIST's post-quantum cryptography standards are designed to be adopted globally by allied nations. This allied quantum ecosystem is a significant structural advantage that China's unilateral approach cannot easily replicate. No other country has anything approaching the network of allied research institutions, shared hardware platforms, and coordinated policy frameworks that the United States can leverage. But that advantage only materializes if the coordination is actually executed, which requires sustained diplomatic attention and joint investment that goes beyond what any individual national program can accomplish on its own. What does all of this mean for how America's quantum lead could actually be lost? And how likely is that outcome? The honest assessment, drawing from the full range of defense, intelligence, and research analyses available as of mid-2026, is that the United States is not currently losing the quantum race in the most critical dimension, which is hardware capability for quantum computing. But the conditions that could produce a loss are present and operating. A sufficiently large and sustained investment gap, if China's total quantum spending significantly and persistently exceeds America's across a decade of compounding progress, creates the kind of accumulated research advantage that takes decades to overcome. A talent pipeline that continues to develop top quantum researchers in American universities and then deploys them to Chinese institutions through legal recruitment channels, progressively erodes the human capital advantage that currently supports American research leadership. A failure to build the domestic manufacturing and physical infrastructure required to scale quantum hardware. At the pace the coming decade demands creates bottlenecks that raw research excellence cannot overcome. A delayed or incomplete migration to post-quantum cryptography leaves American military, government, and commercial communications exposed to retroactive decryption once a Chinese cryptographically relevant quantum computer arrives. And a failure to deploy quantum sensing defenses for nuclear assets before adversary quantum sensing capabilities mature could undermine strategic deterrence in ways that no amount of quantum computing leadership directly addresses. None of these failure modes are inevitable. Each one has a visible policy lever that American decision makers can pull. The executive orders signed in June 2026, the National Quantum Initiative Reauthorization, the NIST Post-Quantum Cryptography Standards, the DOE Quantum Research Centers, and the Allied Coordination Frameworks are all real responses to real risks. The question is whether they are moving fast enough and at sufficient scale to match an adversary that has made quantum technology a declared national priority backed by tens of billions of dollars in concentrated, centrally coordinated investment. Defense officials who have reviewed the classified version of this picture are alarmed enough to have asked for 2 executive orders in a single day. The public version of the evidence is alarming enough on its own. We will be tracking this competition as it develops, and we think it may be the most consequential technology race of the next decade. Subscribe with notifications on, and we will see you in the next video. There is one more structural dimension of this competition that deserves careful examination, and it is perhaps the most underappreciated in mainstream coverage of the US-China quantum race. It concerns the relationship between quantum computing and artificial intelligence, and why the country that leads in both simultaneously gains a compounding advantage that neither technology provides independently. The U.S. says. China Economic and Security Review Commission's 2025 assessment specifically noted that nations which successfully integrate quantum with AI-driven research platforms will compound their advantages exponentially. This is not a theoretical observation. Artificial intelligence is already accelerating quantum research in measurable ways by helping researchers design better qubit architectures, optimize error correction protocols, and identify quantum algorithms suited to near-term hardware. Quantum computing, as it matures, could in turn dramatically accelerate AI research by enabling more powerful optimization and sampling algorithms that are computationally intractable on classical hardware. The country that achieves operational capability in both quantum computing and frontier AI simultaneously is not just ahead in 2 separate races. It is operating in a qualitatively different regime, where progress in each technology reinforces progress in the other, at a rate that adversaries running only one program cannot match. The United States currently leads in frontier AI, with American companies producing the most capable large language models, the most powerful AI training hardware, and the largest AI research communities in the world. Maintaining both that AI lead and the quantum computing lead simultaneously and actively pursuing the integration of the two is the strategic objective that would produce the most durable and consequential technological advantage of the next generation. Losing the quantum lead while retaining the AI lead, or losing the AI lead while retaining the quantum lead, produces a less secure outcome than maintaining both. The role of American universities in this competition is also worth examining in more depth, because the academic research ecosystem is both America's greatest structural advantage in the quantum race and one of its most difficult to defend assets. Institutions including MIT, Caltech, Harvard, Stanford, the University of Chicago, and dozens of others are producing quantum research at a level that no other country's academic system can match in aggregate. The University of Chicago's quantum research ecosystem, for example, has recently generated multiple breakthrough results, including demonstrations of simplified methods for creating powerful, entangled quantum states and new mathematical shortcuts for simulating quantum phase transitions, all emerging from a research culture built around the Chicago Quantum Exchange, which connects the university's research programs to Argonne National Laboratory, Fermilab, and a network of corporate partners. This kind of institutional density, where university researchers, national laboratory scientists, and private sector engineers work in close proximity and share ideas across organizational boundaries, is a specific feature of the American research ecosystem that China's more compartmentalized, government-directed research structure has historically struggled to replicate. The open science culture of American universities, where researchers publish findings, share methodologies, and engage with global peer communities, accelerates the pace of discovery in ways that closed national programs cannot easily match. But this same openness creates the talent flow vulnerabilities described earlier. And it means that some of the most valuable research produced by American federal investment eventually reaches Chinese institutions through publication, collaboration, and recruitment. Calibrating the right balance between openness and protection in quantum research distinguishing between the basic science that should flow freely and the applications specific enough to represent competitive advantage, is one of the central policy challenges facing American quantum governance in the coming years. The private sector's role in the American quantum ecosystem is also a genuine structural advantage that deserves recognition because it has no direct equivalent in China's state-directed approach. American quantum companies are competing with each other across multiple hardware architectures, creating a diversified innovation landscape where different approaches to the fundamental engineering challenges can develop in parallel without any central authority having to bet exclusively on one approach. Google's superconducting qubits, IonQ's trapped ions, atom computing's neutral atoms, PsiQuantum's photonic qubits, and Microsoft's topological qubits are all receiving serious investment and generating real research results simultaneously. This diversity means that if any one approach hits an unforeseen scaling wall, the others provide redundancy and alternative paths forward. China's quantum computing effort, while it includes companies like Origin Quantum, Quantum C-Tech, and Baidu's quantum division, is more concentrated in a smaller number of state-supported institutions and has produced fewer of the hardware architecture breakthroughs that would suggest equivalent diversity of genuine innovation. The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission's 2025 report noted that of the 80 top quantum computing companies identified globally by the Quantum Insider, only 2 were Chinese. That market landscape reflects a genuinely different relationship between the state and private innovation. And while China's state-directed approach delivers advantages in concentrated funding and strategic coordination, it has historically been less effective at producing the kind of heterodox technical creativity that generates breakthrough results in foundational science. This is the dimension of American quantum leadership that is most important to preserve, and it is most directly threatened by policy choices that would over-centralize the American quantum program, reducing the competitive diversity that has made the private sector a genuine driver of progress, rather than simply a contractor to federal research priorities. The question of what quantum computing leadership actually means in the context of nuclear deterrence is the most classified and most consequential dimension of this entire competition, and the one where defense officials are least willing to speak on the record. The unclassified version of the concern comes through in the DIA's public reporting and in the CS's analysis. Quantum sensing threatens to expose nuclear delivery platforms that have historically been undetectable. Quantum computing threatens to break the encryption protecting nuclear command and control communications, and quantum communication provides a pathway to protecting an adversary's own nuclear command architecture from the same threats, while leaving the opposing side's classical encrypted infrastructure exposed. The combination of these 3 capabilities in the hands of a single adversary would represent a strategic challenge of a magnitude that has not existed since the development of thermonuclear weapons. No serious analyst programs that American intelligence assesses as being deliberately obscured is moving in that direction with a pace and a level of resource commitment that American defense planners are right to take seriously. The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission's 2025 recommendation to Congress stated explicitly that quantum is not an isolated research agenda, but should be recognized as a mission-essential national asset, and that the United States should mobilize resources to match that recognition. Whether Congress and the administration will actually do so at the scale and speed that recognition demands is the most important open question in American technology policy as of mid-2026. The executive orders of June 2022 are a necessary signal. Whether they are followed by sufficient action is what will determine whether America's quantum lead becomes a permanent strategic advantage or a temporary head start that a more patient, better resourced adversary eventually closes. Subscribe with notifications on, and we will see you in the next video. One of the most revealing data points in the entire US-China quantum competition is the stark difference in how the 2 countries approach the relationship between classified and unclassified quantum research. In the United States, the overwhelming majority of breakthrough quantum results are published in peer-reviewed journals, presented at international conferences, and made freely available to the global research community. Google's Willow results appeared in Nature. The University of Chicago's entanglement shortcuts were published in physical review journals. IBM's hardware progress is documented publicly on its Quantum Roadmap website. This openness is a deliberate feature of the American research culture, not a policy oversight, and it produces genuine benefits in form of accelerated progress through global peer collaboration and the talent networks that form around shared scientific work. In China, the relationship between published and classified quantum research is deliberately structured to obscure the most strategically sensitive programs. The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission explicitly noted that China is capabilities based on open source information, including the assessments that appear in this video, may significantly underestimate the actual state of Chinese quantum programs. American intelligence agencies have classified assessments of Chinese quantum capabilities that inform the alarm expressed by defense officials, and assessments, and that the Commission recommended treating quantum as a mission-essential national asset, all suggest that what American officials know about Chinese classified quantum programs, beyond what is publicly visible, contributes meaningfully to the sense of urgency that the open source evidence alone does not fully explain. The export control dimension of this competition is also worth examining specifically, because it represents one of the few direct policy levers available to slow Chinese quantum progress by restricting access to American technology and components. The Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security has added quantum computing-related technologies to its export control lists, and the broader semiconductor export controls, introduced in 2022 and expanded in subsequent years, restrict China's access to the advanced chips and manufacturing equipment that support both AI and quantum research programs. These controls have created genuine friction in China's ability to acquire certain categories of quantum hardware components from American and allied suppliers. However, the effectiveness of export controls in the quantum domain is inherently limited by the fact that quantum computing research is primarily driven by scientific knowledge rather than by specific manufactured components that can be controlled at the border. The expertise to design and build quantum hardware, the algorithms to run on it, and the error correction techniques to make it useful are all forms of human capital that flow across borders through education, publication, and professional mobility in ways that export control frameworks are poorly designed to address. This is why the talent pipeline concern described earlier is so important as a complement to export controls. Restricting hardware, while allowing unrestricted flow of the human expertise needed to build that hardware, provides only partial protection against technology transfer. A comprehensive strategy requires not just export controls, but active programs to retain quantum talent domestically and create career pathways that make staying in the United States more attractive than accepting offers from foreign institutions.